For today's conversation, we are joined by Brandon Black, Becca, and Connor, and really to set the stage for Bitcoin custody securing the future. Really want to kind of just open it up, start everybody into kind of stepping into what is custody for them, and then we'll go down the rabbit hole a little bit with some questions. Brandon?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, custody is all about sovereignty. I look at being able to hold, control my own land and my own Bitcoin. So I'm always thinking about it from the perspective of controlling my own destiny with my coins. I think about custody.
Awesome, thank you. Beck?
So custody is really just a required element of Bitcoin ownership. So to me, it really is kind of a base layer understanding of how to own the asset. And one of the unique aspects of Bitcoin is the ability to take custody of it yourself or utilize kind of different aids in order to hold it safely. It's very unique compared to another asset.
Very good.
Yeah, I think I'll probably echo a lot of the sentiment there. I think there's a lot of different reasons why Bitcoin has value. And I think the element of self-custody is a big aspect of that. Even just over the course of some of the sessions today, you heard countless different reasons as to why self-custody is important, and sovereignty can be the difference between having a fruitful life and not. We heard VJ's story about his father traveling with a bag of gold tied to his leg. We heard countless examples from the HRF presentation in terms of how individuals escaped authoritarian regimes and corrupt regimes. There are examples everywhere you look. The trucker protest in Canada, the FTX collapse. If you have your funds on an exchange like FTX and FTX goes insolvent, you lose access to your funds. And so it's a bit cliche at this point, but not your keys, not your Bitcoin. And I think everyone up here can probably attest to that.
Great, great intros. And so last week we were kind of connecting, just talking about the format, the event. And we're talking about how do we introduce custody to the audience. And I think, Becca, you had a great analogy, and I was wondering if you could share it with the audience.
Sure. So AnchorWatch, my company, is specifically an insurer that insures Bitcoin in custody. So part of that business is that we've spent a lot of time educating traditional insurers on Bitcoin custody. So we developed an analogy just to describe it in very simple terms. So I'm just going to share that because we found that it's very easy to understand if you're newer to Bitcoin. So I want you to picture walking into a post office, and inside the post office is a wall of P.O. boxes, right? So something that you see in any P.O. box or in any post office. But this particular wall of P.O. boxes have glass doors or thick plexi doors, but you can see through them. So we view this wall of P.O. boxes pretty much as the Bitcoin blockchain. So anybody can see what's inside, but only the person with that private key can actually go up to a particular P.O. box, put the key inside, open the door, and control what's inside. So it's very transparent. Anybody can see in, but only the person with that private key can actually control the Bitcoin. And so when we're talking about custody, what we're really talking about is how you hold on to that private key. So if you talk about self-custody, we're saying that you take that private key, you hold it yourself, you trust nobody else with it. That's self-custody. If you give it to a custodian, you're saying, hey, I trust you, so you're holding my private key for me, or you're holding in one of those P.O. boxes that you control the key. And all of us are associated with companies that provide support and custodial services that do those kind of things. And you can get a little trickier, right? So picture a nuclear sub that has two keys and both keys must turn. So you can do things like that. But ultimately, what we're talking about is how you get the key in the door and open the door to control the Bitcoin.
I love it. Brandon, Connor, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say the other cool thing with Bitcoin, because it is programmable money, is that you can also have like different time locks on things. I know AnchorWatch uses that, and other companies in this space do as well, where you can have it's these two keys initially, but then there's a third key that could substitute in after some time. So we can have cool programmable locks in addition to just the keys on our PO boxes.
I don't have much to add, but when I think about kind of the core aspects of holding your own private keys, I think a lot of people think about the guy who has like whatever $400 million worth of Bitcoin sitting in a landfill in Austria somewhere, and they are. I could have that completely wrong in terms of the country and the dollar amount, but you get the idea. I think the concept of holding your own keys can be intimidating, and that's why a lot of people defer to just buying some Bitcoin on Coinbase and leaving it there, or now getting exposure through an ETF. And I think the reality is, one, it's not as hard as people think, and the beauty of Bitcoin is that you have the ability to create addresses that have multiple private keys associated with them, and you can customize that address to stipulate there are this number of total keys, but in order to access the Bitcoin, you need this many keys out of this many total keys. It's called multi-signature custody, and I think it's a foundation of something that all of us utilize here, but the point being, you can get into a custody model where you can lose a key and still have the ability to access the Bitcoin. Just to speak to what I do at Unchained. Unchained is a Bitcoin financial services company that helps individuals utilize multi-signature custody to have a custody model that we call collaborative custody, where you can build. You have control of a quorum of the keys, but you're not on an island. You can utilize a partner like Unchained to hold a third key in a 2 of 3 arrangement. You hold 2 keys, we hold 1. If you lose a key, you can always use our key to recover the Bitcoin using your second key and Unchained's key. And I bring that up just because I think that's really where, whether it's Unchained or AnchorWatch or Swan, I think that's really where a lot of the future of custody is going. When you think about especially enterprises and institutions adopting Bitcoin, it's not just going to be one individual holding one private key that they store in a safe. Bitcoin gives you the flexibility to have much more sophisticated custody arrangements.
Yeah, and I want to add one more thing there, which is one of the things that is so cool about Bitcoin in here is you can customize it for your needs. So you can optimize for security. You can do like a 5 of 6. That's an optimized for security multi-sig. Or you can do a 1 of 12, and that's an optimized for recoverability. It's less secure because any one of those 12 keys can sign for it, but it almost guarantees that one of those keys will be able to get it, and that Bitcoin is not going to be a donation to the network. So the customizability with Bitcoin is something that's really unique and special, and one of the things that makes it such cool money.
No, I think that's a great point. And before we go into kind of the rabbit hole of the future of multi-custody, one of the things that I'd like to kind of explore a little bit, there's certainly some folks in the audience that custody might be new, but one of the things that I thought would be a good talking issue would be, explain to me why I need to take my money, why I need to take Bitcoin off of a custody and put it into custody in the first place. And secondly, in your situations where you're at now, do you even recommend single custody?
I mean, I'll say I certainly don't recommend single custody, like where a custodian, whether it be Coinbase or in the past FTX, hold anyone's coins for them. There are situations where that is necessary, but it's like a risk you accept, not a thing you seek out. So yeah, I recommend get your coins off of the custodians because of things like FTX.
I don't disagree with that advice. I think a sole custodian naturally creates counterparty risk, right? So you are putting your trust and your faith in them being good actors, having good security, their procedures being excellent, all of those things. I will say that AnchorWatch really strives to step in and by providing insurance, is a way to enable a higher level of trust when using any variety of custodian types. So whether it's a collaborative custodian, like both Swan and Unchained offer, we also have our own similar, or it's a sole custodian, we can come in, we can do underwriting, look at those practices, and ultimately determine that they are insurable. And then we can place a layer of insurance on top of that custody, which is regulated, has the collateral behind it. So I think there are instances, especially now as institutional money is coming in, commercial customers of all types who are maybe not OG Bitcoiners, who really do need, or believe they need anyway, the clarity of a sole custodian. And so I think our point of view and the value we seek to bring to the landscape is putting that insurance layer on top of it. So that way it actually increases the usability of a sole custodian. That said, there are companies that seek to disperse that risk and distribute that risk across multiple counterparties, which ultimately makes bad actors, the likelihood of bad actors much, much lower.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I kind of approaching that question a little bit of a different direction. I don't know if part of your question was referring to like single signature custody.
Single signature, yes.
Yep. There are varying degrees of custody. And I think on one end you have the exchanges where you are entrusting someone else to hold that private key. And the reality is that's how most people start. That's how I started. I think companies like all of us here on the floor are trying to increase the adoption of going from owning 0 Bitcoin to being self-sovereign and holding the keys yourself. But just like learning about Bitcoin, I think there is an education curve when it comes to learning about custody. You certainly want to be doing it the right way. There are countless examples of individuals who are trying to learn how to hold their own keys and they do something wrong and they lose all of their Bitcoin. And then in retrospect, maybe it was better to leave it on an exchange. I think when I'm speaking with clients, I think the reality is there's not just one right answer. There's not one right solution. And I think the more you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, the longer your investment horizon is, or holding, you're holding it forever. You want to give it on to your kids and have it as part of your legacy. Well, those funds that shouldn't be moved for potentially decades, you want to have a really good custody model for that. The likelihood of FTX being the last exchange to blow up, I would say, is probably pretty low. There will be more, and unfortunately, that's how a lot of people learn the hard way about the importance of holding your own private keys. To answer your question directly, though, when I think about, there on one end you have entrusting someone else to hold your keys through an exchange. On the other end, maybe you have like a robust multi-signature custody model, multiple keys, and these keys are being held in what's referred to as cold storage. If you haven't heard about cold storage is the idea of holding that private key completely offline, off the internet. There are options in between that, though. For example, there are hot wallets, which is a private key that you control the keys to, but it's on an internet-connected device. It's better than leaving your Bitcoin on an exchange, but it has risks because it's on an internet-connected device, and that's natural. It's more easily hackable, or maybe you click the wrong link and you give up that information. My point of all that being, when I'm thinking about holding my dollars, I do own some dollars, I apologize in advance, I'm not going to walk around with $10,000 in my wallet. I might have $100 in my wallet and put $9,900 in a bank vault for long-term storage. And I think you can think about your Bitcoin allocation the same way. Individuals and clients that are using Unchained services are really more on the kind of, this is my Bitcoin for the long term that I don't want to touch, but that doesn't necessarily mean 100% of their Bitcoin is being utilized that way. They probably do have some in single signature custody that if the world is falling apart and they just want to take their device or their seed phrase and hop on a private jet, you have the ability to do that. And maybe if I want to spend some money here at this conference through Lightning, maybe I have some on a hot wallet. So I think there is a varying degree of spectrum there, and it's probably a mix of all those.
No, I think that's a great point. There is a percentage in cold wallet, there's a percentage in hot wallet, some is more readily, easily spendable. Some of it is preserved for generations and just put it away and forget it. As we pivot into kind of the the core of the talk, like custody for the future. How are you guys thinking about providing custody solutions for, next year, next generation, next type of version for the products? I don't know who wants to go first.
Sure. Again, as an insurer, we really are looking at what is extremely resilient, what can be stored in a way that can be accessed when needed, and really extremely kind of segmented and held safely for when it's not needed. We also think about, in the case of, say, a client's death, how can it be accessed by beneficiaries? You talk about wanting to leave it to your family. Like, that actually is something you need to think about when you design your custody solution. So AnchorWatch, in our own custody solution, we utilize a tech called Miniscript, which allows us to take this idea of multi-sig or multi-signature, where, for example, 2 of 3 keys are used. And we take it a step farther by using Miniscript, and it allows us to do things like a multi-sig of multi-sigs. So if it's your Bitcoin, you, your family, your business, whatever it may be, you can have your own 2 of 3, and AnchorWatch can hold a 2 of 3 as well. It's not a 4 of 6. They don't combine into one. They're 2 independent multi-sigs, and both of those must be satisfied in order to move the Bitcoin. So we like this as an insurer because we can protect you from a multitude of bad happenings, right? Loss, theft, wrench attacks, things like that. Because we are a required signer, and that's protocol level, right? So that's something that anybody can go on chain, look at their AnchorWatch vault, and they can see and verify, oh yeah, this Bitcoin actually cannot move unless AnchorWatch also signs with their 2 of 3. Flip that around. You can be protected against us. We can't be a bad actor. We can't abscond with your Bitcoin because you are a required signer. So we use that. We also use time locks, where even if some really unexpected catastrophe happens, or even combination of catastrophes, after a certain amount of time has passed, there are additional combinations of keys that can come together and spin the Bitcoin. So by combining these 2 advanced features of Bitcoin script, we feel very confident in the durability of our storage. We feel very confident in our ability to make sure that beneficiaries are able to access that Bitcoin in the case of loss, and we're able to then, because we feel so confident, fully insure those vaults.
And I'm going to let the gentleman get up here and talk about the future, but one question for you in particular. Over the course of a relationship, like, do you test that? Like, in a year, like, do you get the signers together? How do I ensure that everything looks good on paper, but how do we test it?
Yeah, so in terms, one, of just like verifying it. So whether you call that testing it or verifying it, either way, once a vault is configured, it can be audited because it's part of the public blockchain, so that output descriptor is where you would be able to see that information. So in terms of verifying it, we always do a test transaction, and then specifically to restart those clocks, because trying to not go too deep into the into the tech, so trying to keep it very succinct, but more or less, a lot of companies would do what's called a key health check. So every 6 months or every 12 months, they ask customers to come together, sign a message with your hardware wallet, which more or less proves that you have access to your hardware wallet, you're able to interact with your vault. With Miniscript, we actually need to send the Bitcoin to yourself, which restarts those time locks. So it always takes you back to the top level of security, instead of exposing additional ways to spend the Bitcoin, which are really there just for emergencies. And so that's how we do it. We time those time locks to be the same duration as our insurance policy. So more or less, when your policy is going to expire, it's time to renew your insurance policy, we go ahead and come together and do a transaction with you, which is a self-send, which restarts those clocks.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say, since I want to change Bitcoin guy at this conference, one of the things we really want to change is having the ability to have clocks that don't have to be reset regularly. So right now, a fact of Bitcoin is when you want to time lock something, once you put the Bitcoin in there, the clock starts, and you have to then move the Bitcoin to reset it. It would be great if Bitcoin had a feature where you didn't have to do that. That's one thing to think about the future of custody. I hope that in the future, the general term for this has been historically vaults, but now that term is heavily overloaded because there's AnchorWatch Trident Vault, there's Swan Vault, there's lots of other things that use the term vault. But historically, this idea of being able to have a time lock that starts when you start moving the Bitcoin as opposed to when you lock the Bitcoin has historically been the term vault. So good luck out there with terminology. I'm sorry, everyone.
Solid plug for that too. Totally understand it, totally need it.
Yeah. Anyway, in terms of the future of custody and both self-custody and institutional custody with Swan, I think there's kind of two directions I want to go there. One is that I really want to be able to get more people to be able to self-custody, and obviously the Swan Vault, the project I work on at Swan, is a big part of that because we try to make it the easiest to set up multi-sig with hardware devices in the industry. I hope we succeed. But then we also want to get that to more people. So in the future, we hope to have a wallet that maybe has a lower bar to entry. Instead of needing 2 hardware devices, either you need 0 hardware devices or 1 hardware device. One of the things that people often think of phones as an insecure device, but for most people in the audience, and including myself, my Android or iPhone is the most secure computing device I have, other than a physical Bitcoin hardware wallet. So holding your Bitcoin, like some, $1,000 or something of Bitcoin on a single sig phone wallet is not a wrong choice. And so that's an option that could come to Swan in the future. I don't know, we don't have any concrete plans here, so don't quote me. This is just thinking about the landscape of future custody. Single sig phone wallets are not a wrong answer. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is, I think it's been very lightly alluded to up here already, is multi-institutional custody. Becca talked about having keys held where both AnchorWatch and the client need to sign. Well, if instead of FTX being the sole custodian of the funds on the exchange, if it was FTX had to sign and Unchained and Swan had to sign. I mean, we don't offer that service right now, but that's a future for multi-institutional custody where if you're someone who either because you're not comfortable or because legally you can't take self-custody of your coins, using qualified custodians, but not just one of them, several of them to hold your coins is also, I think, a good future for custodying Bitcoin.
Great point. Anything to add?
It's hard to follow these two, but I would just say, it's important to remember how early we are with Bitcoin, and for that matter, Bitcoin custody. I think the hardware wallet technology, the devices that help you store your private keys, will become easier and more intuitive while still remaining as secure as they are now, or perhaps even more secure if Moore's Law is any indication of how technology advances. And even just in the short conversation here, you can see there are already multiple different ways to approach the same question that we're all trying to solve for, which is how do I hold my Bitcoin securely for the long term while still being a self-sovereign individual? And so I think the custody models will evolve as well. I think the network of keys and multi-institution is a huge aspect of that. And just one last point, and then I'll pass it over to you, Becca, as you mentioned inheritance. And I think as Bitcoin adoption continues to increase and the value of Bitcoin increases, that question becomes much more pressing to individuals. How do I pass along my Bitcoin to my loved ones when I pass away without giving anyone access to my Bitcoin while I'm still alive, even if they are my loved ones and I trust them fully? And so that's a huge aspect of what I think we're all trying to solve for. Becca?
We are early, but I think one kind of cool thing to just ponder in terms of, my lens is always insurance, and so we're really the first coming in. We're fully backed by Lloyd's of London, and we're able to insure our own custody solution. We could insure others' custody solutions as well, after audits and things like that. But why is that? Why was insurance not available before and it is now? And it's because the custodial solutions have developed so far. So in fact, all of these methods that we're discussing are actually very, very safe. They're very low risk of loss. These levels of redundancy, and the cool thing is that they're so safe because insurance didn't exist. There was no backup. There was no Lloyd's coming in if you messed up, if you put your laptop in the landfill to save the day. It's a bearer asset, and if it's gone, it's gone. That's still true, but because of these levels of redundancy, because of really clever people thinking up, well, what if this happened? What if this and that happened? What if that's a bad guy and that guy got hit by a tornado at the same time? These scenarios get thought through by really intelligent people to the point that actually Bitcoin custody is very safe. Yeah. Right? So it's something that you need to do your research. If you're going to get help from a company, do your research on the company, find a good one, preferably an insured one. But these solutions are in place that should make you feel very, very confident about holding Bitcoin at this point.
Great point. And in your lens, how did the insurance companies come up to speed? Like, has that been a revelation in the last 6, 12 months, years?
I'm going to say it's been developing over the last 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
So Lloyd's, oldest insurer in the world, super respected. They're known for insuring the weird stuff, right? So up until, and even including now, Lloyd's is the primary interested party in providing insurance. And so they dove in about 7 years ago. And really, their knowledge is just growing over time. So even as AnchorWatch was launching and securing reinsurance and making sure that we could fully back our and other vaults, it really is an education process. So, we started with the post office analogy. We developed that analogy specifically to educate legacy insurers. So when we're talking to Swiss Re and Munich Re, we really have to go back and start at the beginning. Here's what custody even means. Here's what a private key is. Here's how you can take something that's in the digital sphere that lives in the ether, but yet you can take physical custody of it, right? So your Bitcoin can be abstracted down to 24 words on a steel plate. So is Bitcoin physical? Kind of,
yeah.
Right? And if it's a physical thing that you can put in your pocket, why can't you insure it, right? So it really was an educational journey across the board, and it's been really fun.
I'm glad you brought him along. We have about 5 minutes left there before we get into Q&A. Is there anything else that you want to tell the audience, or maybe kind of lean the audience to a certain rabbit hole?
I was going to say, tailing off of what Becca said there, Bitcoin is this fascinating thing because it is both physical and digital. It's a bearer instrument, but you can also share access to a single bearer instrument. And so really has forced all of us who think about computer security, as all of us up here do, to rethink some of these things. It used to be that you kind of had a single secret, and that was your secret. But with Bitcoin, we can have multiple secrets. And so how you store secrets, how you control access to secrets, how you detect tampering with secrets, all of these things matter. And I think the more people think about those things, the better. So really think about, if you're going to store your own Bitcoin, how you secure both. Let's say it's a hardware wallet, but also the seed backup. The seed backup is the Bitcoin. If someone gets that, they have it. So we really have to think about these things as that mixture of physical and digital.
Going back to one of the first questions about why custody is important and self-custody is important, I think we all talked kind of at length about sovereignty. I think utility is an important aspect to consider as well. When you're leaving your Bitcoin on an exchange, or even a step further from that, have exposure within a Bitcoin ETF, you lose a lot of the utility that Bitcoin has to offer, whether it's being used as a medium of exchange, whether it's being used as collateral in a Bitcoin-backed loan, which I think is going to be a space that will continue to develop as Bitcoin adoption increases. You're not getting the full advantage and benefits of what makes Bitcoin so great if you're not self-custodying. So outside of protecting it and protecting yourself against the next FTX or Celsius, or take your pick, you're also not leveraging the full power and value that Bitcoin has to offer. And with my last comment here, I'm going to play to the crowd a little bit. I do just want to say I've been super impressed by the organization of this conference. It's gotten me very excited about the future of kind of Bitcoin in Pacific Northwest. And the energy here feels very authentic and organic in a way that I've never felt at any other Bitcoin conference. So I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Eric and Eddie and everyone who has been a part of making this so successful.
I mean, I can't top that. Certainly, also impressed and thankful for everybody to give their time and come learn about Bitcoin and Bitcoin custody and vault solutions. Do we have any questions in the crowd?
As we see, the adoption of Bitcoin grow and thinking about institutional adoption of Bitcoin, most ETFs and MicroStrategy, right, they're all using Coinbase, and I imagine that one day, just like we do, we want to self-custody our Bitcoin. But I also have a hard time imagining, a board director of Amazon each having a metal plate with some seed phrase written on it and using a cold card on a computer. How do you envision the evolution of self-custody from an institutional point of view?
So I suspect we will see ETFs looking to continue to use custodians, but potentially look to break up the custody to more custodians. So right now it's extremely centralized at Coinbase. I think there's chatter in the industry where they're exploring additional custodians. So I think as a next step, that's probably, that wouldn't be surprising to me if we hear that, hey, they're taking 10% and putting it elsewhere and 15% and chunking it up so there's not this honeypot at a single provider. I think there will also be technological advancements, right? So I described how Miniscript can work to require signatures by multiple parties. So I think you mentioned multi-institutional, right? So that tech already exists. So the same Bitcoin could be held by multiple institutions or multiple custodians. So instead of only breaking up the large quantity of Bitcoin and putting 10% here and 10% here, you can take that one Bitcoin and share the ownership. So if you think about a bar of gold, a bar of gold can be held by one person or you can hand it to somebody else and they can hold it for you. But with Bitcoin, we can each hold half of it, right, by having required keys, and that's unique. So I think that's something that I do expect will come, but the thing with that is you have to wait for regulators to come along with that, because right now there are qualified custodian rules and things like that are very oriented to legacy finance or traditional finance that aren't, the guidance right now is not set up to support this concept of we can both hold the bar of gold at the same time. So I think changes will come.
I want to actually add also, there's more technology coming here. There's a signing technology that's being developed called Frost, which you may or may not have heard of. And one of the very interesting properties that is going to further bend regulators and custodians' brains with Frost is that you can have a single apparent key with Frost and change who holds the pieces of it and how many pieces are needed to sign. And I was talking at the recent conference in Austin with one of the guys working on Frost about this, and it's really kind of mind-blowing to think that you can transmute essentially one form of custody from a 2 of 3 to a 7 of 9 without moving it on the chain. So there's a lot that's going to develop over the coming years around how a board of directors could actually hold pieces of a key, but then even if a board changes, they can still maintain that custody safely. So there's cool stuff coming.
I'll just add quickly, we've discussed a lot of 2 of 3 today, and there is a balance between simplicity and security. You could have a very robust, sophisticated setup, but at the point that it becomes unmanageable, that's actually a flaw in your security model. We've talked about 2 of 3, but it doesn't have to be 2 of 3, and I think the reality is, as enterprises and institutions start adopting Bitcoin and wanting to hold real Bitcoin themselves, they probably will use something more sophisticated than a 2 of 3, whether that's a 3 of 5 or a 5 of 7. That's the beauty of Bitcoin, is that it's not rigid. It is rigid in some regards, but there is a lot of programmability to it as well. So it can evolve as adoption increases.
For the rest of the audience, how do you vet the holders of the keys? Or the custodians? Good question.
So I'll answer
Carefully.
as an insurer, because we are looking at that when we decide if we're going to cover a company. And ultimately, so answering, purely for ourselves, we are looking at it in a really kind of traditional way. So if we're insuring a business, or if we were insuring a business that provides custodial services, so either way, so whether I'm directly serving the owner of the Bitcoin or I'm insuring a company that custodies Bitcoin, in either case, I am looking at really all sorts of traditional data elements. So I'm looking at insurance loss history. I'm looking at criminal backgrounds. I'm doing all sorts of background checks on these individuals. I'm looking at their physical security. I'm looking at their procedures. I'm looking at how long the company has been in existence. I'm looking at where the officers came from. So for ourselves, we're insuring, potentially up to $100 million per customer, $350 million per institution. So we are very, very stringently looking at who actually participates in key holding and really all different angles.
Yeah, the same way you pick a doctor. Like you've just got to really look at it hard, go by reputation, get a recommendation, all that kind of stuff.
I think it's a good question because custody and custody solutions are really kind of, they are an option for Bitcoiners, and there's a trust factor that, if I'm going to come in underneath the service, I need to vet like a doctor or like somebody I'm going to trust. It's a relationship. So many different factors on that. Long story, happy to chat afterwards as well with you if you have any other questions. I think we're out of time. Please.
Thanks, y'all.